Þágufall nafnorða. Dative nouns. Samtal 1. Ég býð. Maturinn var ótrúlega góður. Hvaða réttur fannst þér bestur? Þorskurinn með ristuðum kartöflum var yndislegur. Eigum við að borga reikninginn? Já, en ég býð. Ertu viss? Auðvitað. Þú varst að kaupa mér hádegismat. Allt í lagi, kærar þakkir. It's now time for us to learn our next case, the dative or þágufall. The basic function of the dative or receiving case is to indicate the recipient of an action or object. This is in contrast to the accusative þolfall, which marks the object experiencing the action. As expected due to its function as the receiving case, þágufall is often used for indirect objects of verbs. Til dæmis, ég ætla að gefa honum bók í jólagjöf. I'm going to give him a book for Christmas. Kennarinn segir krökkunum sögu. The teacher tells the kids a story. The dative also indicates the location of something when used with the prepositions ao and I. If used with a verb that doesn't imply a motion, then the noun or phrase following the preposition will be in the dative. For example, við búum í miðbænum. We live in the centre of town. Björn býr á Egilsstöðum. Björn lives in Egilsstaðir. Contrast this to a sentence like við förum á veitingastaðinn, where veitingastaðinn is in the accusative. We'll look at this distinction in detail next week. There are other prepositions that always take the dative case, such as af, which means of or off of, and frá, from. For example, á ég að taka mynd af ykkur? Should I take a picture of you? Eruð þið búin að keyra frá Hafnarfirði? Have you driven from Hafnarfjörður? Remember the question, hvaðan ertu, from lesson 2, week 4. Check the last slide in that video if not. When we answer that question, for example with ég er frá Skotlandi, Skotlandi is in the dative case because of the preposition frá. The preposition með, with, can sometimes take the dative case too. For example, if you're talking about going out with someone or something that accompanies something else. Komdu með mér út. Come out with me. Ég ætla að fá þorsk með ristuðum kartöflum. I would like the cod with roast potatoes. Rauða húsið með gömlu þaki. The red house has an old roof. We'll look at this in detail next week too. Finally, some verbs take a direct object in the dative. Around a third of Icelandic verbs govern the dative. This is just a feature of the verb that you have to learn. Viltu hjálpa henni að leggja á borðið? Do you want to help her lay the table? Við ætlum að eyða 3 dögum í Madrid. We're going to spend 3 days in Madrid. Kisan fylgir þræðinum gólfið. The cat follows the thread around the floor. So hjálpa, eyða, and fylgja are 3 verbs that take the dative case. This table shows the singular pronouns in the dative case. As you can see, they're all distinct from their respective nominative and accusative forms. So going from left to right, we have mér, þér, honum, henni, háni, því. These are the plural dative pronouns. Okkur and ykkur are the same as in the accusative. In the third person, we lose the gender distinction and have one form for all 3 genders, so þeim for kallkyn, kvenkyn and hvorkyn. So moving on to nouns. Strong masculine nouns that end in ur or nn get an e in the dative singular. For example, hestur, hesti, steinn, steini. If the noun ends in ir or ell, simply remove the ending. So the dative form is actually the same as the accusative. Læknir, lækni, bíll, bíl. Some nouns that end in ur also don't get an e ending. For example, hvalur, hval, staður, stað, skápur, skáp. Most of these nouns form their nominative plural with ir, so that can be a clue that it won't get the dative e, but not all of them. Skápur, for example, is skápar in the nominative plural. Some nouns that have an ir plural do get the dative e. For example, vinur, vini. This can be a little bit of a minefield, unfortunately. Things are much simpler for weak masculine nouns. Just like in the accusative, the e ending changes to a. Penni, penna, lampi, lampa. Sometimes strong masculine nouns can get a vowel change in the dative singular. This vowel change is known as the I shift and also occurs in the nominative and accusative plural. So for now, you may wish to remember these as exceptions. Til dæmis, þráður becomes þræði, thread. Fjörður, fjord, becomes firði. Dagur, day, becomes degi. Björn, bear, becomes birni. Ketill, kettle, becomes katli. The masculine singular dative definite article is num. As always, the article is the same no matter how the dative of the noun itself is formed. An odd quirk is that sometimes an ur noun that does have an e ending without the article, such as Íslendingi, loses it when the article is added, so becoming Íslendingnum. Again, this is a bit of a minefield, so it's best to try and learn the dative singular forms of nouns ending in ur by heart. Hestinum, steininum, þræðinum, lækninum, bílnum, hvalnum, Íslendingnum, pennanum, lampanum. This table sums up the dative singular forms of various masculine nouns, both without and with the definite article. So hestur, hest, hesti, steinn, stein, steini, bíll, bíl. Hesturinn, hestin, hestinum, steinninn, steinin, steininum, bíllinn, bílinn, bílnum. In the feminine, the dative singular is exactly the same as the accusative singular for all types of nouns. So rós stays as rós, mjólk becomes mjólk, mentun, mentun. The ing ones get the ö, just like they do in the accusative, so æving becomes ævingu. And then the weak ones, they get the same ending ö, which can cause u-shift, kona, konu, kaka, köku. So nothing new here. The feminine singular definite article is different from its accusative counterpart, however, so it's inni and not ina. So rósinni, mjólkinni, mentuninni, ævingunni, konunni, kökunni. This table sums up the dative singular forms of various feminine nouns, both with and without the definite article. So rós, æving, ævingu, kaka, köku. Rósin, rósina, rósinni, ævingin, ævinguna, ævingunni. Kakan, kökuna, kökunni. Like the masculine, the dative singular ending for the neuter is ir. However, it's much more regular in that all neuter nouns get this ending, except a tiny handful of common words ending in "-ie", such as tre, tree, and "-nye", knee. So land, landi, barn, barni, bakari, bakaríi, but tre, tre. As with the weak nouns in other genders, the dative form is the same as in the accusative. In fact, for neuter nouns, it's the same in the nominative too. So auga, auga, hjarta, hjarta, no change at all. The neuter singular definite article is different from its nominative and accusative counterpart, however, and it's inu as opposed to ið. So landinu, barninu, bakaríinu, trénu, auganu, hjartanu. So then this table sums up the dative singular forms of various neuter nouns, both without and with the definite article. Barn, barni, tre, tre, auga, barnið, barninu, treð, trénu, augað, auganu. This slide sums up all of the rules for forming the dative singular. For masculine and neuter strong nouns, add e, except for the masculine groups that don't get e, so hesti, steini, lækni, bíl, and then landi, barni, skipi, tré. And the feminine, there's no change from the accusative, so rós, mjólk, mentun, æfingu. For the weak nouns, again use the same endings as in the accusative. Penna, lampa for the masculine, konu, köku for the feminine, and then auga, hjarta for the neuter. And finally, the definite articles are num, inni, and inu, respectively. The dative plural is our favourite case ending because it's the same for all nouns regardless of their gender or ending in the nominative. The rule is to remove the ending if there is one and add hestum, steinum, bílum, pennum, rósum, æfingum. Because this ending starts with it causes a U shift where applicable, so look out for that. For example, kökum and börnum. And then we have skipum and augum. And finally, there are a handful of exceptions to this rule. Don't worry too much about these at this stage. One worth mentioning though is the dative plural of skór, shoe, which is skóm. The dative plural ending with the definite article is unum. Here the M from the noun ending is absorbed into the article, so it's unum rather than umnum. This leads to some sometimes silly sounding runs of nunum in certain words. For example, steinunum or bananunum. Hestunum, steinunum, bílunum, pennunum, rósunum, æfingunum, kökunum, börnunum, skipunum, augunum. It's worth just looking at the whole declension paradigm so far for various nouns. So this one shows a strong masculine noun in all of its forms. Hestur, hest, hesti. Hesturinn, hestin, hestinum. And the plural, hestar, hesta, hestum, hestarnir, hestana, hestunum. And here we have the pattern for a weak feminine noun. So kaka, köku, kakan, kökuna, kökuni. And the plural, kökur, kökum, kökurnar, kökunum. And finally we have a pattern for a strong neuter noun. So barni, barnið, barninu, börn, börnum, börnin, börnunum.